The afternoon sun beat mercilessly upon the dusty train station, its wooden planks groaning under the weight of boots and bustle. Wagons creaked, children cried, and gossip traveled faster than the prairie wind. Among the crowd stood a woman clutching a small carpet bag, her gloved hands trembling though her posture remained painfully straight. Her name was Clara Dawson, and today was supposed to be the day she began a new life as a bride. But promises are fragile things, easily broken beneath the weight of pride and cruel tongues. The train hissed as it settled, passengers spilling onto the platform in a rush of color and noise. Clara searched anxiously among them until her eyes landed on a tall man flanked by his mother and younger sister. Relief touched her features until she caught the sneer curling at the edge of the mother's mouth. The man, her betrothed, or so she believed, looked her up and down as though he were examining livestock. "You didn't tell me she was this old," the mother whispered sharply, but loud enough that Clara heard. Her heart thudded against her ribs. "I thought I made it clear," the man muttered, his jaw tightening. "She's past her prime, Ma. I won't saddle myself with a spinster." The words fell like stones. Clara stood rooted, her dignity forcing her to hold her chin high even as heat flushed her cheeks. A few townsfolk paused to watch. A merchant chuckled under his breath. Children whispered, "She's been left behind. She thought she'd snare herself a husband. Look at her now. Too old for marriage, poor thing." Every word was a dagger, cutting deep in the one before. Clara swallowed, her throat dry as desert sand. She wanted to scream, to run, to vanish into the cracks between the boards of the platform. But instead, she stood silent, spine straight, her carpet bag clutched like a shield. The man who had promised her marriage, who had written letters filled with sweet assurances, turned his back without another word. His family followed, their whispers trailing behind them like poison smoke. And just like that, Claire was discarded. The train whistled again, preparing for departure. Passengers bustled, life carried on, but Clara's world had stilled. She sank onto a bench at the far end of the platform, away from the curious eyes, yet still within reach of their whispers. Dust rose around her boots. Her carpet bag sat at her feet, heavy with the few belongings she had dared to call her dowry. Her chest burned with humiliation, but she did not cry. Not here, not before them. She would not give them that satisfaction. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap and fixed her gaze on the horizon, as though staring hard enough might open a door into another life. The minutes dragged. Shadows lengthened. One by one, the crowd thinned until only a few stragglers remained. A pair of young women passed by, their giggles muffled behind gloved hands. An old ranch hand tipped his hat to her, pity shining in his tired eyes. A boy no older than 12 pointed openly at her, asking his father why the lady was all alone. Alone. The word clung to her like dust, settling into her skin, her very bones. Clara drew in a shaky breath. She had taken a chance on hope, answering letters, believing in promises, and now she bore the price of being naive. Too old. The insult repeated itself in her mind, each echo sharper than the last. She was 30, not ancient, 30 and capable, 30 with dreams still alive inside her. Yet to them, she was already discarded, a wilted flower no man would want to place on his table. Still, even as her heart ached, Clara refused to bow beneath their cruelty. She straightened on the bench, adjusted her bonnet, and pressed her lips together in defiance. They could laugh, they could whisper, they could label her unwanted, but they could not take her dignity. The whistle of another train in the distance pulled her from her thoughts. The tracks rattled faintly, the sound carrying across the plains. Clara's fingers tightened on her bag. She considered, for a fleeting moment, stepping onto the next train that arrived and leaving this place behind forever. But where would she go? She had sold what little she owned back east. All she had left were a few dresses, a Bible, and the remnants of her hope. For now, she would sit. She would endure. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the station. Somewhere a dog barked, and a rancher cursed as he loaded crates into a wagon. Clara closed her eyes, exhaustion settling deep into her bones. This was not the future she had dreamed of. This was humiliation sharp and bitter. And yet, as the evening wind stirred her skirts and cooled the heat in her cheeks, she whispered to herself, quietly, stubbornly, I am not broken. Not yet. She did not know it, but someone had been watching. At the edge of the station yard, leaning against the weather post of a hitching rail, stood a man in a wide-brimmed hat. His coat was dusty, his boots scuffed, and his eyes carried the weight of 1,000 silent sorrows. A cowboy widower, known by some but understood by none. He had come for supplies, not for spectacle, yet he had seen everything. The rejection, the cruelty, the woman's quiet strength as she held herself upright in the face of disgrace. His jaw tightened as he watched her. The crowd's whispers still echoed faintly, but the man heard something else beneath them. The silence of loneliness that mirrored his own. For now he did not move. He only watched, his shadow stretching long in the fading light, as the woman on the bench sat with her carpetbag at her feet, left behind but not defeated. And in that moment, though neither knew it yet, the course of 2 broken lives had already begun to shift. The prairie stretched endlessly beneath a pale sky, its golden grass swaying in the late afternoon breeze. On the horizon stood a lonely ranch. Fences in need of repair, a barn with broken boards, and fields too dry to promise a good harvest. It was land meant for a family's laughter, yet silence ruled here, broken only by the creak of wind against shutters. This was Daniel Holt's world. A man once full of promise, now carrying the weight of grief like a brand across his soul. Years ago, Daniel had been a husband and a father. His wife, Anna, had filled the house with warmth, and their little boy had chased chickens across the yard, his laughter ringing louder than the church bell on Sunday mornings. But then came the fever, sudden, merciless, and within weeks, both wife and child were laid to rest beneath the willow tree at the edge of the property. Since then, the house had been silent. Daniel lived with ghosts. He rose at dawn, tended cattle, mended fences, and came home to cold meals eaten in solitude. His neighbors knew him as a man of few words, a widower buried more in work than in living. The debts on his ranch grew heavier with every season, but Daniel bore them with the same silent endurance he bore his grief. He was a man accustomed to loss, to the slow erosion of hope. That day, Daniel had ridden into town for supplies. His horse's hooves clattered against the wooden street, drawing glances from townsfolk who offered nods of respect, tinged with pity. He tipped his hat politely but said little. Words had long ago lost their ease for him. The train whistle cut across the air, sharp and shrill. Daniel tethered his horse near the station and leaned against a hitching rail, waiting for the noise to pass before collecting his goods. It was then that he saw her, a woman in a travel-worn dress, bonnet shading her face, sitting alone on a bench. At her feet rested a small carpetbag. Around her, the remnants of a crowd lingered, some sneering, some whispering, others pitying. Daniel caught enough of the whispers to piece together the story. She had been promised marriage, only to be rejected in front of everyone. Too old, they said. Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew cruelty when he heard it. Life had dealt him enough blows to recognize another's wound. He studied her quietly, not with a stranger's amusement, but with a grieving man's recognition. The way she held her back straight despite her humiliation, the way her hands gripped the carpetbag like it was the last anchor she had, it stirred something deep in him. She was not crying. She would not give them the satisfaction. And that, more than anything, made Daniel respect her. For in her silence, he saw himself. How many nights had he stood by the window, bottle in hand, refusing to let tears fall where the shadows of his lost family lingered? How many mornings had he pushed aside despair, tightening his jaw and going back to work because survival demanded it? He, too, had lived beneath the weight of pitying eyes. He, too, had been judged for what he could not control. And so, as he leaned on the rail, watching her in the fading light, Daniel Holt felt a strange pull. Not desire, not yet, but recognition. This woman carried her burden with the same quiet strength he carried his. Still, Daniel was not a man quick to act. Pain had made him cautious, wary of reaching for anything resembling hope. He turned his gaze toward the horizon, telling himself he was only a bystander, that her fate was no concern of his. Yet his eyes drifted back, again and again, to where she sat. The station grew quieter. The gossips departed. The rejected bride remained, her figure small against the vast emptiness of the prairie evening. She looked like someone stranded between worlds, too proud to beg, too weary to move. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of his own loneliness press harder against his chest. Perhaps it was foolishness, perhaps mercy, or perhaps simply the echo of a man who had once vowed never to let another soul suffer alone. Whatever it was, Daniel knew one thing. This woman's story was not finished yet, and though he did not yet understand why, a part of him already sensed his own wasn't either. The sun had begun its slow descent, staining the sky in shades of amber and rose, but the train station remained restless. A knot of townsfolk lingered like vultures, circling around the woman left behind. Their voices were hushed enough to carry malice, loud enough to cut through her heart. She thought someone would take her? At her age? Imagine waiting all this way, just to be tossed aside. Too old for love, too proud to admit it. Each word was a lash, meant to humiliate further. The woman sat upright on the bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap, refusing to let her chin tremble. She had already been abandoned by the man who promised her marriage. She would not give strangers the victory of seeing her break. But their laughter grew sharper, bolder. A boy threw a pebble near her shoes. Two women snickered behind lace gloves. She remained silent, but silence only made them crueler. From the edge of the platform, Daniel Holt had seen enough. The widowed cowboy pushed away from the railing, his broad frame cutting a path through the crowd. Dust clung to his boots, and his spurs chimed softly with each step. His expression was carved from stone, grim, tired, but unflinching. The whispers faltered when he drew near. "That's enough," Daniel said, his voice deep and steady, carrying the authority of a man used to command. "She's not some sideshow for your amusement." The townsfolk shifted uncomfortably, their courage fading beneath his glare. No one argued with Daniel Holt. Grief and hard work had carved a reputation around him that no man cared to test. Still, a merchant's wife muttered, "Then who'll have her, Holt?" "She was left because no one wants her." Daniel's jaw tightened. He turned to the woman on the bench. Her eyes met his, dark with hurt, steady with pride, and something in him moved. A memory of standing alone by his wife's grave, listening to murmurs of pity he hadn't asked for, the sting of judgment, the loneliness that clawed the soul. And before he could stop himself, the words left his mouth like a vow. "If no one wants her, I'll take her." The station fell silent. Every head turned. Every eye widened. The gossips who had been so quick to mock now stood frozen, mouths parted in disbelief. Even the woman herself, this stranger, this abandoned bride, stared at him as if it spoke in madness. "You what?" she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. Daniel straightened, his hat shading his unreadable eyes. "You heard me. She deserves better than shame. If marriage is what saves her dignity, then so be it." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Is he serious? The widower marry her? He's lost his mind. But Daniel did not waver. For him, it was not romance nor desire, it was defiance. A man refusing to let cruelty triumph. His gaze remained on her, steady as a promise. The woman's lips parted, her breath quick. She had come expecting love, only to be branded unwanted. And now, in the ruins of her humiliation, this rugged stranger had extended a hand, not in tenderness, but in a kind of raw, unpolished mercy. Her heart raced. Was this pity? Was it another kind of shame? Or was it salvation? Daniel reached down and lifted her carpet bag with one hand, his gesture as firm as a verdict. "She's coming with me," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "Any man here has a problem with that. He can take it up with me." No one spoke. No one dared. And so, before the crowd could recover from its shock, the widowed cowboy and the abandoned bride walked away from the station together. Not as strangers, not yet as partners, but as two broken souls bound by a decision neither had planned to make. Behind them, the gossip swelled like wildfire. But ahead, the prairie stretched wide and uncertain, carrying what at the beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined. The ranch stood against the horizon like a lone sentinel, weathered wood and stubborn fences braving the prairie winds. It was not grand, not polished, yet it carried the weight of sweat, sorrow, and survival. When the wagon rattled to a stop, the woman sat stiffly on the bench, clutching her carpetbag as if it were the last anchor of her old life. Daniel Holt swung down first, his boots crunching on the dry soil. He offered no words, only a brief glance to see if she would follow. She hesitated, then lifted her skirts and stepped onto the land that was now, by a sudden vow, supposed to be her home. Awkward silence stretched between them like barbed wire. He led her toward the cabin, a sturdy structure of logs and stone, its porch sagging slightly but still holding strong. Inside, it was clean yet barren. A table, 2 chairs, a hearth, a bed in the corner covered neatly with a quilt. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone, who asked for little beyond necessity. He cleared his throat. "It ain't much, but it keeps the wind out." She managed a polite nod. "It's more than I had this morning." Her words trembled with honesty, yet she steadied them with dignity. Evening fell quickly. Daniel lit a lantern and coaxed the fire to life. At the table, they shared their first meal together, beans, cornbread, and silence. The crackle of the fire filled the space where conversation refused to grow. She sat straight, hands folded, waiting for him to speak. He chewed slowly, as though words were harder than food. Finally, he said, "You don't owe me anything. Not chores, not gratitude. I just couldn't leave you there." Her eyes flickered, but she did not reply. Inside, a question burned. Was she only his burden? The following days unfolded in unfamiliar rhythms. At dawn, she woke to the rooster's call and found him already in the fields, repairing fences or tending cattle. She offered to help, but he hesitated and used to another set of hands in his world. Still, she insisted, and soon she was learning ranch chores, awkwardly at first, dropping pails of water, fumbling with stubborn goats. Yet each mistake drew no scorn from him, only quiet correction. At supper, firelight softened his face, revealing the man beneath the hardened mask. She began to notice the small gestures, how he placed an extra log on the fire when the night grew cold, how he left a sturdier chair for her, how he never let her bucket grow too heavy before taking it silently from her hands. And slowly, trust began to thread its way between them, not spoken, not yet acknowledged, but alive. Still, in the quiet of her thoughts, doubt gnawed. Each time she caught his gaze lingering, she wondered, did he see her as a wife or only as a responsibility he had foolishly claimed? In the solitude of that ranch, 2 strangers shared shelter, and though the walls were strong, the true question loomed in every shadow and flicker of firelight. Would this house ever become a home, or merely a refuge built on pity? The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the pop of burning wood in the hearth. Outside, coyotes howled at the moon, but inside the cabin, the world was small, just 2 strangers bound by vows neither had expected to make. She sat near the fire, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The glow painted her face with shadows, softening the lines of sorrow etched deep by years of whispers and rejections. Finally, as though the weight had grown too heavy, she spoke. "They never saw me," she whispered. "Not as a woman, not as someone worth choosing. First it was excuses. I wasn't pretty enough, not lively enough. Then it became my age. Too old, they said. As if life ended the day a woman turned 25. Her throat tightened, but she pressed on. At the station, when they called me a burden in front of everyone, I felt smaller than I ever had, like I wasn't even human anymore." Daniel looked at her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. His jaw worked as if chewing on words he wasn't used to giving away. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice low, steady. "You're not alone in that kind of hurt." He took a breath, shoulders heavy beneath the memories. "I had a wife once, a good woman. We had 2 little ones, bright as spring mornings. But sickness don't care about love or hard work. Fever took them all in the span of weeks." His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "I buried my whole world in that soil out there." Her breath caught, eyes softening. For the first time since the station, she looked at him not as a stranger, but as a man broken in his own way. Pain recognized pain. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was shared, like a wound exposed to air so it could finally heal. Her hand trembled, then slowly, she placed it on the table between them, not reaching for him fully, but letting the gesture linger, a silent offering. He noticed. For a moment his roughened hand hovered, then rested gently atop hers. No words, no promises, just the quiet truth that they were no longer entirely alone in their grief. Her lips lifted in the faintest smile, fragile yet real. And for the first time since she stepped into his cabin, warmth bloomed in her chest. That night, as the fire dimmed, two broken souls discovered the fragile beginning of something more than survival, something that might, one day, resemble love. The morning was quiet, almost deceptively so. A low wind whispered through the dry grass of the ranch, carrying with it a tension Daniel couldn't shake. He'd spent years surviving with his own two hands. But now there was someone else to protect. By noon, the unease turned into reality. Riders appeared on the horizon, dust clouds marking their approach. Whether bandits after cattle or vigilantes from town looking to teach him a lesson for sheltering the unwanted, Daniel couldn't say. But their laughter, cruel and sharp, told him enough. They hadn't come in peace. Inside the cabin, she felt it too. Her hands tightened around the edge of the windowsill as she watched the men circle like wolves. Fear clawed at her chest, but deeper than fear was anger. For years she had been mocked, cast aside, treated like nothing. Not today. When one of the riders dismounted and spat insults, calling her old baggage and worse, Daniel's temper flared. He stepped forward, rifle steady in his hands. This land is mine. This home is mine. And she's under my roof, so she's under my protection. The men sneered. Shots rang out. Chaos erupted. The fight was rough, desperate. Daniel's aim was sharp, but the numbers weren't in his favor. At one point, a rider lunged from behind, ready to strike him down. And that's when she moved, faster than she thought possible. With trembling hands, she grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the fire and struck hard, saving him from the blow. The bandit fell, stunned. Daniel turned, shock flashing in his eyes as he saw her standing there, chest heaving, eyes blazing like a woman who had finally found her voice. For the first time, she wasn't a burden, she was a shield, too. Together, they forced the attackers back, their combined strength driving the riders to retreat into the dust they came from. Silence fell again, broken only by their ragged breathing. When it was over, Daniel lowered his rifle and looked at her, not as a stranger, not as a duty, but as someone who had just stood shoulder to shoulder with him in fire. His voice came rough, thick with something unspoken. You saved my life. Her lips trembled into a small, almost disbelieving smile. Maybe you were never meant to fight alone. The moment between them stretched, his gaze falling to her lips, her breath catching as the world seemed to hold still. His hand brushed against her cheek, gentle and reverent. For a heartbeat, they leaned in, so close the air itself felt fragile. But then, just as suddenly, both pulled back. Fear, hesitation, and the weight of unspoken vows held them apart. The fire between them had been lit, but neither dared to let it consume them, yet. That night, as the embers glowed low, two souls who had just faced death together sat in silence, each carrying the same unspoken truth. They were no longer just surviving. They were becoming each other's reason to fight. The storm had passed outside, but inside the cabin, silence lingered like a heavy cloak. The fire crackled low, shadows dancing on the rough-hewn walls. For days they had lived in a strange rhythm, two strangers learning each other's breaths, steps, and fears. But after the attack, after she had stood beside him in fire, Daniel could no longer keep the truth locked inside. He set aside the tools he had been polishing and looked at her. She was bent over the table, mending a torn shirt with careful, trembling fingers. Her hair caught the glow of the fire, and in that moment, she looked like something sacred. His chest ached with the weight of words he had carried far too long. They saw you as unwanted, he said at last, his voice deep and unsteady. She froze, needle poised midair, eyes flicking up to his. His jaw tightened as he went on. But I see the woman I prayed for. Strong, brave, a heart that didn't give up even when the world try to break it. Her lips parted, breath catching. Tears shimmered in her eyes before she could stop them. She shook her head weakly. You don't understand. All my life I've been told I was too much or too little. Too old, too plain, too cursed. Every proposal ended in whispers. Every glance turned away. I thought maybe I wasn't meant to be loved. Daniel crossed the space between them, each step slow, deliberate. He reached down, gently taking the needle and fabric from her trembling hands, setting them aside. His callous fingers brushed over hers, grounding her. Then they were blind. Because I see you, all of you, and I swear I've never seen anything more worth loving. Her tears finally spilled, rolling down her cheeks, not of shame this time, but of release. She let out a shaky laugh, a sound that was half sob, half relief. I don't know how to be someone's wife anymore. I don't know how to be wanted. Daniel's thumb brushed away the tears from her cheek, lingering with reverence. His voice broke into a whisper. Then let me teach you, and let you teach me, because I've forgotten how to be whole, too. The air between them pulsed with something raw and fragile. She searched his face, and in his eyes she found no pity, no obligation, only truth. Slowly, he lowered his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling, hearts pounding. And then the distance was gone. His lips claimed hers in a kiss that was not rushed or desperate, but deep and steady, a vow written in fire and gentleness. She responded, her hands trembling as they clutched at his shirt, pulling him closer. It was healing. It was surrender. It was the first time she felt truly chosen. When they finally parted, the firelight cast their joined hands in a golden glow. The cabin, once a hollow place of his grief and her shame, suddenly felt different. The walls no longer echoed loneliness. They wrapped around them like a home. That night, they did not speak much more. Words had done their part. Instead, they sat by the fire, shoulders touching, silence carrying a new meaning. Not emptiness, but belonging. For the first time in years, both hearts slept without the weight of old wounds, because they had found a new beginning together. The days that followed brought quiet changes, the kind that begin in whispers before they grow into something undeniable. At first, the townsfolk still stared when Sarah walked beside Daniel. Whispers floated in the marketplace. That's the woman left behind at the station, the one he married out of pity. But slowly, the murmurs shifted. They saw her rise at dawn, working the ranch with strength that surprised them. They watched her smile at children who once pointed and giggled. They saw her stand tall beside a man who never once let her feel small. Daniel's loyalty spoke louder than any gossip. Where others saw too old, he saw the partner who carried burdens with him, who brought laughter back to a home that had only known silence. And where others doubted, Sarah proved herself. She learned the land's rhythm, guided cattle with a steady hand, and stitched torn saddles by lantern light. The ranch, once crumbling under debt and grief, began to breathe again, because two broken souls had learned to heal together. By late summer, the whispers in town had turned to nods of respect. The grocer slipped an extra sack of flour into Sarah's basket with a smile. The blacksmith tipped his hat when she passed. Even the women who once pitted or mocked her began to ask advice, curious about the woman who had endured rejection yet stood prouder than most. It wasn't just Daniel who saw her now. Society did, too. And for Sarah, that quiet acceptance was a balm, though the only gaze that truly mattered still belonged to the cowboy waiting for her each evening at the porch. The ranch itself bore witness to their bond. Together they planted, rebuilt fences, and mended what time had broken. The laughter that echoed across the fields wasn't just Daniel's anymore. It was hers, too. Nights that once belonged to silence now belonged to soft conversations, shared dreams, and the steady warmth of two hands never letting go. Every sunrise painted their love across the horizon, each day proof that what began as desperation had grown into something eternal. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold and rose, Sarah stood on the porch. Her gaze stretched across a land that was now hers as much as his. Daniel stepped beside her, his rough hands wiping traces of soil from a day's work. For a long moment, they said nothing, simply watching the horizon glow. Then he turned to her, his eyes steady, voice carrying the weight of every vow unspoken. "You'll never be unwanted again," he whispered, his hand finding hers. She gasped softly as tears welled in her eyes. But he continued, voice firm yet tender. "To me, you are everything. This ranch, this life. It means nothing without you in it. From the day I found you at that station, I thought I was giving you shelter. But truth is, Sarah, you were the one who gave me back my heart." Her tears spilled freely as she clutched his hand tighter. "And you gave me something I thought I would never have, a home, a love I was told I didn't deserve. But, Daniel, you made me believe again." The setting sun wrapped him in its light as he drew her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead with reverence. In that moment, the cabin behind them wasn't a place of grief anymore. It was a home built on second chances. The ranch before them wasn't just a survival anymore. It was their future. Hand in hand, they stood together, facing the wide horizon. And as the last rays of light slipped beneath the earth, both knew the truth that would carry them through every storm to come. They had been broken, they had been unwanted, but together they were forever.